Give everyone a chance to jump on here. Friday night live stream special broadcast premiere. I hope everyone's doing great, man. So I just got back from spending a weekend with none other than Daniel Sheehan. Daniel Sheehan is one of the, he's a national treasure. The guy has been around trying to get these people in Washington to fly straight for 35 years, 40 years. He was the one responsible for bringing Iran-Contra to the forefront and the hearings that followed. He's been at it a long time. I was also with Linda Moulton Howe. And Linda Moulton Howe is a living legend of an investigative reporter. What's up? Welcome, everybody. Welcome, y'all. She's 84. She turned 84 3 weeks ago. She's sharp as a tack, but she is just a reciprocal for so much whistleblower testimony. And finally, I spent some time with Ross Coulthart. And Ross Coulthart, as many of you guys who are tuning in probably already know, is one of the premier active investigative journalists acting with massive integrity. He's the one who, the last two whistleblowers to come out, the most recent of which has firsthand, hey Davey Ray, good to see you, brother, has firsthand experience working both in the psionics programs and also in the crash retrieval programs. And his name was Jake Barber. And Ross Coulthart, you know, in a sane world, this interview would have been broadcast on every mainstream media outlet. But unfortunately, we know who controls the mainstream media outlet. So Ross Coulthart, he's a very, very articulate, very well-spoken, very, just chock full of integrity. He's an Australian journalist who, he bounces around. He has his own podcast and YouTube channel, but he's one of the most respected guys out there. You know why? Because he's a massive cynic. And I got a chance to sit with him, and he brought in a whistleblower who he's been vetting for 3 years now. 3 years he's been in touch with this guy. And this guy showed up at the talk. I only know his first name. It's the first time he's ever spoken in public about the program that he was in when he was a kid. So we're going to get into that. I want to share with you guys everything I've learned, and I'm super excited to do so. So, like, one of the things I found out that they mentioned that became very clear is the pushback on this cover-up also has a lot to do with the fact that they've been using children for a long time as part of these programs. And you know, look, I think the most recent release of the Epstein files show that there is no limit to the to what is conscionable to these people, you know, as far as what they will use children for. So, you know, none of this should come as a surprise to you. But I want to tell you guys a story and try to fill you in on everything I've learned and how it relates to and how it's backed up by some facts, you know. But, you know, the question is, are kids being routed from different aspects of the public school system into a secret space program, into these agencies and their use? And if you've ever seen Minority Report, then you know that those young women who have that precognitive ability, who are kind of stuck in that vat of nothingness, just spitting out crimes before they happen, you know, these movies they're inspired by someplace. They don't just come from you know, the air. You know, these directors, particularly directors like Spielberg, they're plugged into the agencies. That's how they get these stories. Who's directing the next big giant disclosure movie? Steven Spielberg. Big coincidence. Who directed E.T.? Who directed Close Encounters of the Third Kind? All these movies come from actual documentation and case files and interactions with ET, EDs, whatever your, my God, they got every acronym in the book. NHIs, non-human intelligence. You know, these beings, which we have been interacting with since the time we got here on this planet, roughly between 200 and 3,000 years ago, in this DNA, right? So the question I kept hearing posed and kept getting answered by Daniel Sheehan, Ross Coulthart, and Linda Moulton Howe was, what is going on with these children How are they involved? What is happening? We know MK Ultra. We know from survivors and massive testimony that still exists to this day that they will take a child and use it from the time it's born, and then once in a while one gets out, right? Or once in a while one of them starts to remember, and that becomes a big issue for them. But, according to whistleblowers, the U.S. is actively engaging UFOs. So people always say, "Oh yeah, well, how did they traveled all this way just so they could get shot down?" We're not, my friend. We're not firing cruise missiles at these things. We tried that in World War II, and we realized it was a big old waste of time. We don't shoot anything at these. If you don't understand that we have a crash retrieval program, and not for when they crash by accident, but for when we successfully bring them down. And it's never a fiery wreck. Because if it was a fiery wreck, then everyone would catch wind of it. No, they've learned how to bring these craft down using a combination of radar, which acts as a weapon of sorts. It disrupts their electronics enough. And then they use these children, which is what I'm learning, to use their psionic abilities, which have been honed and honed and honed for years, to bring that craft down without it turning into a complete catastrophe, fiery wreck, because they want the technology. It's always been about the technology. And they don't like the fact that these beings have the ability to flip the switch on our nukes. And they have shown that over and over again. And if you think that that sounds like conspiracy theory, there's a wonderful book for you to read. It's a documentation of every time a UAP/UFO, whatever your chosen nomenclature is, has decided to flip the switch and shut off a nuke, either silos or, and the thing we blew up in Iran, the energy centers. Power plants, right? And they do, and that, imagine the United States government, how frustrating that can be for a government like the United States to be rendered completely impotent like that, and unable to do anything about it, right? So Daniel Sheehan, I've had him on my podcast. I'm trying to get him back in person because he is just at the forefront of this. He was part and parcel with Dr. Stephen Greer for many, many years. They did a lot of incredible work. They made some documentaries that, if this subject interests you, I'm assuming you have seen both Unacknowledged and Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Those two documentaries are absolute must-sees. I've seen the rest of the documentaries, and some of them are okay, but they all come with a loaded, I'm sorry about the beeping. I'm actually not, I'm not in my typical recording studio. I'm at my parents' house, and my dad is turning 80 this weekend. So I'm set up here, and you'll have to bear with the beeping because that's the door going in and out, and there's nothing I can do about it. So just listen to me, ignore the beeping. Speaking of programming and conditioning. So Danny Sheehan alleges he has testimony, he has documentation, and he has people in these programs actively. Danny runs the New Paradigm Institute. That's an offshoot of the Romero Institute, and that is right in Washington, D.C. He's literally plugged in to these people. And there are some good guys working on these programs who are just afraid to make any kind of move because they value their life and they know what may happen. But, he talks about this. They're not just recovering, crashes anymore. They're actively causing them. And I've been saying this for a while. How foobar is it that this planet has become hostile to intelligent, sentient life? Like, God forbid somebody take a wrong turn and drive by Earth. Because we have the ability, and we've had it since Roswell, to bring these ships down and bring them down in a way which we can recover the technology. So there's been hundreds, my friends, hundreds, many of them with bodies. I have so much information I'm going to get into with you guys. I want to share with you guys, what Danny shared with me. Danny talked about, he's had briefings from intelligence insiders and individuals who are literally working right now with these classified programs. And that's his basis for these claims. He's like, we don't have a doubt. And I'm going to get into, I'm going to have a call to action for you guys who really care about this as much as I do. And because listen, let me tell you guys something. Why should you listen to this? This is more important than the Epstein files. These files can change the world. The Epstein files could bring justice and hold a lot of people accountable. That'd be great. But would it change anything? Would it change the world? No, because the other half of those rats underground will continue to do what they've been doing to children and use their money to get away with it, just like before. Even if you arrested the whole lot of them, there'd still be those who carried on. These files would change the fabric of society itself in a way that it could never go back. Why do you think that this is the biggest cover-up? It's always been the biggest cover-up. Because there's everything at stake. The entire structure of society is at stake. Why? Because obviously, if we find out that, EB comes from a planet that is how many light years away, and they're about 20,000 years ahead of us technological-wise, and we have a chance to interact with them and their species, and they ask questions like, wait a minute, you pay money to live on land on the planet that you were born on? I never would have thought of that. Let me get this straight. You guys have all this food, and then you keep it under lock and key while people go hungry? Like the whole basis of the control systems in place in our society would be shaken to their core, and they would collapse because they're faulty. They're weak, and they're being propped up right now by these same families that put them in place. And that's who's responsible for the Epstein files, and that's who's responsible for keeping these files secret. You bet your ass it's the same families. It's a very minuscule percentage of humanity controlling the rest of us, all 8 billion of us. Though, ask me another time about the time I tried to count 8 billion using the WHO's population consensus. Yeah, didn't work out so well. The math didn't pan out. Anyway, I think they're exaggerating about that. So, in this account that Danny talks about, he's talking about the fact that these programs that are associated with our government have the ability to track these craft now, not just when they materialize, but when they're cloaked, and even when they're still transdimensional. That's how far the technology has advanced with our programs, with our secret space program, which, if you're a fan of this topic, then you probably have no doubt, and you shouldn't have any doubt, about our secret space program and its long time freaking existence. I'm going to try to not to swear as much in this podcast and see if it helps my algorithm, my algorithms. So, Peterson Air Force Base was identified as a training nexus for what's described by some of these people as Space Warrior Garden units, right? Trump is responsible for the Space Force. Why do you need a force? What are you pitting the force against? What is being set up? What did Trump just say about his, we're going to release all the files? Yeah. As if Trump has access to all the files. As if every president since JFK has had access to anything. He doesn't. He doesn't, and he couldn't, even if he wanted to. If you think that they buried the Epstein files, they've been burying these files for 80 years, right? So these systems that Danny describes, he even knows the name of the program. It's called the Golden Domes program. That's the tracking system that is in place. He said there's hundreds of people working on it, not just in the CIA and the NSA, across every agency. You have hundreds of people who are working right now, actively, on tracking our skies and our space in and around our planet and our solar system. And I'm going to get into what Linda Moulton Howe says as well, but what happens to the control structure for the civilization that is 10,000s of years more advanced and involved than us if it's allowed to be introduced? What happens to religion? What happens to everything? This is why this subject, in my opinion, I mean, it's so much more important than the Epstein files. Not that the Epstein files aren't important and that we shouldn't be demanding their release, but these are monumental. And that is a page in history that will be forever stuck together. Even if we can get it unstuck, it's still going to be illegible. This is something that could change everything, right? So my point with this is we're not just retrieving them, we're not just finding them, we're also bringing them down, and we're also, so there's an element that is, we're flying them, because we're keeping them from crash landing. And that means that we have taken conscious control of that craft. Now, how do they do that? What's up, Marina? Good to see you. It's been too long, my friend. Welcome back. So, Linda Moulton Howe talks about how the United States, and listen, if you guys have seen, William Tompkins' deathbed interview, 6 hours he did with Linda Moulton Howe, his history and working in the aerospace industry and in these massive think tanks like the Rand Corporation, all his credentials check out. And he didn't want to die without telling everyone what he experienced in World War II and in the years that followed. And he told a tale. If you have not seen, he also has a book. His name was William Tompkins. Incredible dude. I post a bunch of videos of him. They always go viral. He's wearing a crazy toupee in the video. People always focus on that instead of what he's saying. Anyway, people. So she talks about, a conversation that she had never spoken about before with an insider, and said that right now he knows of 3 ships that are interstellar: the USS Curtis LeMay, the USS Hoyt Vandenberg, and the USS Roscoe Hillenkoetter. First of all, the fact that they named a fucking ship, well, there goes my PG-13 rating. They named a ship the Curtis LeMay. Okay, if you don't know anything about Curtis LeMay, not a good guy. In fact, one of the worst guys, like part and parcel with Kissinger on our foreign policy. I mean, Curtis LeMay is like someone who was like, it's a good idea if we nuke Russia because then they'll nuke us and we can nuke them back. They'll only kill about 20 million of us. We'll be fine. Then we can obliterate Russia and take it over. That's Curtis LeMay in a nutshell, okay? Curtis LeMay was a psychopath. Kennedy did not like him, and Kennedy feared him. And we have a fucking interstellar ship named after this pile of... Don't get me started. Anyway, so the fleet is described by this guy as obviously not functioning with typical propulsion. It's called deep quantum tunneling protocol, and it essentially sets the stage for what we already know exists with these craft. And just so happens, lo and behold, in the last year, NASA put out a video explaining deep quantum tunneling protocol. That's a mouthful. Bear with me. Deep quantum tunneling protocol. And it's a system based on resonance and frequency, not combustion and destruction, like everything else we like to move around with. So, if we're flying them, how do you control them? So, if you've ever read Michael Sala's books, as I have, God, you'd think he would come on my podcast. I'm probably the only nerd who has ever read all his books, and he won't come on and talk to me. And now he has health problems. He's got a great Telegram page though, if you want to stay in the loop with everything esoterically, politically oriented. Anyway, sorry, bear with me. I'm excited. So, how could you say that we're controlling these? The buzzword is psionics, and essentially it's psychic ability. Now, I don't know if you guys have the same algorithms as me, but I've just I've been coming up against over and over the GATE program. Now, many of you probably heard of the GATE, who's heard of the GATE? Who's seen the videos about the pink liquid and the GATE program? Anybody listening? Probably some of you listening were involved in the GATE program. Do you guys remember what that stands for? Let me tell you. It's the Gifted and Talented Education Programs that were kind of partnered in around the country with a lot of public schools, particularly ones near both the ocean and military bases, right? And I had no idea. So I went to private Catholic school, and they probably would have passed me over anyway because I had a twin brother, and they would have been like, no, they're not worth it. But so a lot of people who I know, turns out, were involved in the GATE program, right? And a lot of them have very, very traumatic memories. They talk about a pink liquid they were forced to ingest, tests they were forced to endure. Some people have stories that are just typical, and other people talk about things that, everyone involved has a problem remembering exactly what they were doing, which is very suspicious and stinks of MK Ultra techniques and mind control. Now, the whistleblower who I just listened to, who came out for the first time and sat with Ross Coulthart, we called him Tim. I think that was all we got. I think that Tim was his name, but they wouldn't give us his last name. He talked about going to school in upstate New York, being part of a GATE program, being taken underground once a week, being tested. Now, what were they testing him for? He's pretty confident, after listening to a lot of stuff that Ross has talked about, and also recent testimony from Jake Barber, that he was being tested for his psionic ability, because they used a lot of the cards, they used binaural beats, right? So these children were being pulled from class regularly, and they were evaluated. And I think depending on how much acumen they showed, that's how far they would continue to take them. So this guy, Tim, they traumatized the shit out of him. And this poor guy, he's still traumatized. Think Stranger Things, if you've ever seen that show, like the Montauk Project. The tests they were doing on him, first, once they realized he had ability, then they started to use trauma. And so this is very disturbing. I heard this from Danny Sheehan, that he recently found this out. So they're taking children, and they've been doing this for a long time. And the way that they get them to separate from their body, and they have a means of actually testing this now, which is crazy, and it speaks to the technology and instrumentation that they're sitting on. But so they're branding these children, I hate even saying this, in the rectum and in the rectal area with brands, with hot pokers. And that typically will cause a child with these abilities to go out of body. And then from there, they start to, disassociate the personalities and train the kid to go out of body using trauma and fear once they trigger that response. Now, I heard that not only from Ross Coulthart, but from Danny Sheehan. And Danny Sheehan is plugged into these insiders. And they have interviewed the same whistleblowers and come out with the same information. Now, that is highly, highly disturbing and should bother you as much as the fucking Epstein files bother you. The fact that they are using children for this. And I'll tell you, why do I believe Tim? Now, I listened to Tim's story, and I was skeptical, just as Ross Coulthart is skeptical. Because I was like, come on, this kid's like 6, 7, 8 years old. How is he being taken underground? He's being like traumatized. He's being branded like cattle. How the do you go home and put a straight face on for mom? And then I remembered, some of my own trauma and how frozen it causes you to be. The younger you are, when you experience it, you just kind of freeze. It's part of our response, the fight or flight or freeze, right? So his mom was a single mom. So get this. He starts remembering all these things, right? He remembers, for him, they were using an electroshock prod, and they were shocking his rectum. But that was after they burned him with the thing. Why do I think that's true? So when he was an adult, he had to get an operation for prolapse, for a hemorrhoid operation. And when they went in, they were successful in the operation, and they said, why didn't you tell us that you had a previous operation? And he was like, he didn't know what to say. And he said, you know, your whole rectum has been put back together. And he was like, and so he has that. He has that medical report of when he got the operation and what the doctors told him about what they found. And that he was unaware that he had that kind of internal scarring that comes from that kind of an operation, from the repair they had to do on his ass. That is crazy. Hey, Krista. This is heavy, Faust, but I'm glad you're getting the word out. Thank you, Krista. So much to get out. And I have a party to go to. But so that's validation, right? Like the GATE program is real. I don't think that is up for debate. That's not a conspiracy. That is well documented, right? And I'm going to talk about some of that documentation. We're going to get into it. But another thing that I wanted to share with you guys, this is so FUBAR. Like secret society, like it's like scary procedure. It's fucking crazy. It's so traumatizing. Like, and I personally had an out of body experience during a very traumatic moment in my childhood when I was probably 10. So I understand exactly what they're talking about and why they would use this to get a child to go out of body. It was the one and only out of body experience that I had in a state of consciousness awake. And it was during a very traumatic moment from my childhood, which is crazy. I mean, when I heard that, I was blown away, right? So this is how disrespectful these people are. Now listen, you know what they call this program? The Immaculate Constellation. That is the name of the ongoing program with these kids. And that brings into the forefront the testimony of these 3 recent whistleblowers. And if you guys haven't seen them, you got to check it out. You know, if you go to my playlists on this channel and you go to Faust Highly Recommends, you'll see a press conference from 2023. You'll find the testimony of Michael Herrera in there. Herrera was, I believe, a Green Beret, or he was either a SEAL or a Green Beret in Indonesia. Him and his team came across a 100-foot levitating UFO being loaded with these metal crates by a bunch of guys who he said were wearing black clad and speaking with American accents, and they were more well armed than them. And they were immediately disarmed, and they were going to just kill him. And then because of who his grandfather is, he believes they wouldn't pull the trigger on that, no pun intended. But when he saw the crates, he saw a bunch of men like me loading these big things into a UFO. And they were almost killed for it. But he assumed that it was drugs, guns. And then following that testimony, Jake Barber came out, who has direct hands-on involvement in these programs, and said those were not filled with money, with guns, with drugs. They were filled with children. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to share with you some of the protocols that they use to find these kids and single them out all around the world. And they look at countries like Indonesia, the more poor, the easier it is to steal a kid, obviously. You know, and they look for certain traits, like really left-handed. If the male is effeminate, he makes a better candidate, probably because, you know, he's more in touch with those faculties. Good balance. Divine feminine, strong masculinity. Anyway, all these different things, right, that they look for. It's just wild, right? And he informed Ross Coulthart after he heard that testimony. He's like, they were loading children. One of the reasons why he came out and decided to, I forgot what they call it, like initially part of his mission. So this dude, like Ross Coulthart talks about Jake Barber. He said, this guy is the closest thing to James Bond I've ever met in my life. He's like, I'm just blown away by the level of training he had in every aspect of both espionage, psychic warfare and also in crash retrieval programs with these programs. Jake Barber, his name is. And Jake Barber has a fascinating story too. I'm going to get into all these notes I made for you guys, but just to give you a little idea, check out Jake Barber's interview with Ross Coulthart. Listen to what he put his life on the line to say. It's a miracle the man is still walking around. They had to literally change the laws to get people like him to come out and say that these programs are unconstitutional and illegal, and you are not breaking an NDA, and you cannot be sued into oblivion if you spill the beans about them. And yeah, anyway, hold on, let me see if I can, there we go. Yeah, so if you're looking for children, you know, where would you find them? Well, in the United States, we know they were using the Gates programs to find them, right? Across the country. The gifted and talented education programs. They were embedded inside ordinary schools all across the nation. It's, and that's a fact, right? So identification began early on, elementary school. Why? One of the things Tim said, this whistleblower said, he said, you know, the things that they did to me, you couldn't do to a teenager. You couldn't do to a grown man. He said, because you would break them. And I thought, wow, that's a statement. And that's true. Kids have this incredible ability. They're so malleable to compartmentalize trauma and to find a way to go on that, you know, as you get into your teenage years, and they know this because they've studied it, you know, like, you know, you would break someone, and that's not an asset anymore. That's, you know, that's of no use. And so Ross argues that there is a national gifted identification system being used as a filtering seed, if you will, as a system. And it's not because like every teacher is in on it. It's, you know, it's because once these kids were identified, they were documented and categorized and then tracked. And some of them continued to be worked with and trained, and others were, you know, I've spoken to, it turns out 2 people who are very close in my life were part of these programs. And one is like, dude, PTSD, you know, like, I don't want to talk about it. They had me drinking this pink liquid and they were playing beats in my ears, and he's like, I don't remember it, I don't want to remember it. And I had another person in my life say, yeah, I was taken. She was like, I think they checked my vision, and she's like, I don't really remember anything, but I don't remember anything happening. I think they just thought, well, this one's not worth the trouble, and let her go on her way, because she doesn't really have any trauma that she remembers, but my other friend does. And this guy, Tim, who I listened to, had massive trauma, but they developed his psionic abilities. He knows that for a fact, because he talked about, you know, how accurate he was using those, what do they call those cards? The Z cards, or, you know, and how he could affect, he showed them he could affect a thermometer with his mind. And of course, you know, they must have loved that, because they kept working with him and traumatizing the poor bastard. Anyway, enormous resources were devoted to finding these children. Far less resources was devoted to actually teaching them. It was the search where all the money was going. So that tells you how important these programs are, probably to more than one facet of these underground programs, right? And so Danny Sheehan talked to me and spoke about the birth of the national security state, you know, how this all came about. He talked about 1947, the National Security Act permanently reorganized the U.S. defense and intelligence into a centralized structure. Of course, that had to happen. I mean, and they're still using that as a platform for every unconstitutional thing they do to us on the daily, my friends, on the daily. The CIA was created, compartmentalized programs were created, the whole need-to-know doctrine became institutionalized, right? That's what Dwight Eisenhower came up against. That's why he gave his famous farewell speech. That's why Kennedy was killed. One of the things, everyone talks about how Kennedy tried to repeal the Federal Reserve, and he did. He started printing money. I think it was backed by silver, right? But the other thing that Kennedy did, which no one talks about, is he ordered the CIA to prepare to release all the information that had been covered up until that time in 1963, 62, 63, about the UFO cover-up, because he was privy to it, right? Let me just take care of cute puppy here. Let me see here. I think maybe 24 hours will do. There we go. Sorry about that. I don't have a moderator, guys. Bear with me. When people like cute puppy come in with nothing to do except distract me, I just gotta put them in a 24-hour timeout. Anyway, so 1957, an important year because it's the year that the Soviets launched Sputnik, right? And in September of 1958, Dwight Eisenhower signed the National Defense Education Act into law, which goes into everything I've been talking about. Now, how do you get education and defense into the same sentence? How, you understand what's happening? What did Trump just do with glyphosate? How did he take what the industry, big agro wanted, and twist it into now? Sorry about that, guys. Is the connection okay? Yeah? Everyone good? Okay. So listen, we're going to fast forward a little bit. Federal funding flowed into science, mathematics, and foreign language instruction, right? The act itself expanded large-scale guidance, testing, and student identification systems. Identification systems. That being the key word, right? And for the first time, the federal government formally linked talent identification to Cold War security strategy. How effing convenient. Are you guys starting to see the pattern? What just happened with the woman who was kidnapped? What was the commercial they ran at the Super Bowl? Oh, we're using your camera to help find your lost dogs. That's so kind of the government to use these programs to help us like that. Yeah, it's crazy, Krista, right? So Cold War strategy. Immediately, listen, Danny Sheehan told me point blank, when the Russians first tried to end the Cold War and George Herbert Walker Bush got the call, he hung up on them. Why? I'm telling you why. You're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars being funneled into everything that these pieces of, anything they wanted to do with it. George Bush didn't want the Cold War to end. He was using it to funnel billions. And Reagan, of course, they loved Reagan because he was like, yeah, take all the money you want. They were giving him tours. And Reagan writes in his diary about meeting with 3 people from the space program and talks about how they can now put people into orbit indefinitely. Now, did you know that we can put people into orbit indefinitely? No, I was unaware we had that ability. It talks about something like hundreds of people. And that's what they told Reagan. You know why they told him that? Because they were so giddy about all the money he was giving them. And he wrote it in his diary. He wrote it in his journal. Inexplicably, oops. And they published it. They were like, maybe people just chalk it up to nothing. Anyway, that's like the tip of the iceberg compared to what they were really doing. But they couldn't help. They wanted to share with Ronald what they were being able to accomplish with all the money. So let's talk about SRA. Who's heard of it? Science Research Associates. This built the large-scale standardized test systems that's across the American school system, right? And these systems were capable of sorting and categorizing millions of students. And for what? Now listen, this is where it gets funky. In 1964, the SRA was acquired by, guess whom? IBM. You know IBM, the same IBM that was responsible for helping Germany document their concentration camps, that IBM. And at the time, this is 64, IBM was deeply embedded in federal and defense contracting for what? The Cold War. Go figure, right? So You had national student cognitive profiling now existing within the same corporate structure serving national security agencies. You guys starting to see how this all ties together into what these whistleblowers have just begun to say incontrovertibly is happening with these kids, right? Large-scale student testing, federal defense infrastructures were no longer separate. They were institutionally joined. That is extremely dangerous and problematic for a multitude of reasons, you know. So let's get into a little bit, if you will, about, let me see here. So I want to explain to you guys why, you know, the implications of this, you know, of the Golden Dome and because it's malicious. You understand? It's not, they're not doing this in an exploratory way. They're doing this to maintain the control structure, and they don't care who they hurt in the process. They don't care how many eggs they break to make their omelets. You know, this is what Danny Sheehan told me, all right? He told me that their definition of catastrophic disclosure would be if they tried to have a complete all-out nuke fest, you know, a nuclear war. If they tried to do that and the UFOs showed up to shut down the war the way they have, he said that's what they consider catastrophic disclosure. In what world are we living in where the people running these programs consider the shutting down and the stopping of their ability to destroy nations and themselves and all of us while they hide in their bunkers, would they consider that catastrophic and not what they were trying to do? That is how fucking twisted these people are. So understand who we are talking about, who is running these programs. They are every bit as demented and sick and twisted and eugenics indoctrinated as the people in the Epstein files. In fact, they're some of the same people. They truly are some of the same families involved. And that's the truth. So Linda Moulton Howe, guys, I'm gonna tell you, I've been listening to Linda for many, many years. And she's always been someone who has bought into some of the more horrific propaganda that's being peddled. But it's never been the sole focus of what she has put out. And I've never been bored listening to Linda. This time was a little different. You know, Linda, and I love Linda, and I respect Linda, and I could talk to Linda for days. But I believe, sadly, that a lot of people who have had her ear over the course of this last year are propagandists and are plants, and she's being funneled information. You know, listen, I'll just say this. She led her talk with these sentences. She said, "I've become closer with Lou Elizondo." And I was like, ooh. Who knows Lou Elizondo? Lou Elizondo is the cat that keeps going on, and he's like, we don't know what they are, but we know something big is coming. Something big is coming. That's all I can say. I worked directly with these programs. I don't anymore, but I can't talk about them. Wait a minute, if you don't work for them anymore, then why can't you talk about them? How are you still bound to your non-disclosure agreement if you're not working for them anymore? Lou Elizondo is full of shit. He's duplicitous. He can't be trusted. In that, Dr. Greer got it right. Lou Elizondo is a puppet. He's a talking head for these programs to instill fear in the public. You know, because this is what Linda Moulton Howe led her talk with. She said, Lou said, yeah, that is the definition of controlled opposition. It's people like Tom DeLonge, Lou Elizondo, in my opinion now Jeremy Corbyn, what's his name, who was at one time a true, you know, I think truly someone seeking the truth in earnest. He made that great documentary about Bob Lazar, which was still on Netflix last I checked, called Bob Lazar and Hangar 54, maybe. Fantastic documentary. But they got to Jeremy because he's really wide-eyed now, like Kash Patel wide-eyed now when he talks. I call that the Kash Patel effect. You know, it's where they I think they put you in a room and they tell you exactly how things are going to be from now on and what's going to happen if they're not. And if there's any resistance, they show you what they're going to do to you and your family if you don't march in step. I call that the Kash Patel effect. I'm 99% sure that's what happened to him. And also, you know, you look at people like, what's her name? Cackle Law, the lawyer, Harris. Do you guys remember Kamala Harris before she became VP, right? Who knows if she was VP? She never actually showed up for a day of work. But I remember the debate, and you know, Kamala Harris has this reputation for being very, very intelligent, very cruel, very intelligent. Like, she's not someone you want to go up against. She's fucking cutthroat, right? And I heard that from someone in Chicago who worked with her. Crazy, right? I was like, damn, that's quite an impression, you know. And this dude was just a regular old dude. He was a person of color. He you know, he had no reason to badmouth Kamala other than he had a bad experience working with her. I was like, God damn, that's. I mean, I would have guessed it, but damn. Did you notice Kamala before she became VP and then after? She just got really wide-eyed and couldn't do anything but laugh and try to make, I don't know, complete like one single full sentence. She couldn't do it in 4 years. And I think she was just completely stymied by, you know, they sat her down and they said, yeah, here you are in your position and you're not going to say a fucking thing. Not about the fact that that's not Joe Biden and not about the fact that you're going to change anything. And I'm sure she was like, okay, all right. Yeah, cackle, cackle, laugh, laugh, wide-eyed stare. Anyway, guys, these programs, they're great like that. I mean, look at Kash Patel. Watch Kash Patel's interview with Sean Ryan before he was sworn in, and then look at him afterwards. The dude looks like he dropped acid, okay? That is not normal. It's not normal to go from looking like you and I to like being bug-eyed out of your face every single time you're on camera. It's not normal. They did something to him. How else do you sit in front of everyone who you promised to get the files for and say the files don't exist when you already knew they existed? You just blatantly lie. That's how brainwashing works. Anyway, I digress. Forgive me. If you guys are here and you've been here, you know that I tend to do that sometimes. So anyway, Linda talked about, she played us a boring ass video from NASA as if we could trust anything NASA says about anything, right? But she does say what I've been telling people for a long time, and that is, if you don't know that there's a secret space program, if you're unaware or you doubt that, you've got a lot of reading to do, a lot of videos to watch. But I promise you, with absolute certainty, we've had a secret space program for decades. And we're not the only ones who have it. Basically, every major nation has signed on to this program. India, China, Russia. We're all friends out in space. Here, we let the theatrics go on and we fire rockets up into the air and we pretend like this is the pinnacle of technology, but you best believe that there are people at the top of each and every one of those governments that know that that is a dog and pony show meant for you. Because when you see a rocket get fired up into the air, you might as well be watching Locomotive or an antique show, because that technology is over 100 years obsolete. Period. Full stop. And that's what the secret's about, right? So we noticed when we retrieved the craft at Roswell that there were no instruments. There was no steering wheel. There was these little men. Oh, by the way, you guys got to see this. So Linda Moulton Howe did share this picture with me. This is crazy. I got to show you guys this. So this picture was authenticated. It's from a body that was recovered at the Roswell crash. And this was found by the grandson of someone who worked at Wright-Patterson. That's where the bodies were first brought, okay? And he found it in a shoebox, and it was dated 1951 on the back, right? And he said it was one of 11. And he sent, and Linda, it took her so long, she got him to part ways with one of the originals. And she had it tested, and it came back authentic. And this is a picture of one of the beings that was recovered. at Roswell. Look at that. Like, look how wonderfully sentient those eyes are in that body. I mean, you see why they said they look like kids, right? They were only about 3-4 feet tall tops. This was one of the bodies. This is one of 11 photographs that this guy found. That's wild. And Linda, of course, being an investigative reporter, she found a way to get the guy. Thank you so much, Krista. It's crazy, right? She found a way to get this guy to get the picture to her, and she had it tested, and it came back authentic. Not AI, not doctored. A real old photograph of this. It's wild, right? And dude, I look at this and, you know, my heart breaks that we're doing this to these, they're people, you know, whatever they are. They're sentient beings. And we treat them the way we treat each other, which is just with no regard for life at all. So much to learn, so much to be shared. And what is the human race doing? It's a travesty. It's just terrible. Anyway, let me get back to some of this information before I go off on another rant and get emotional. Okay, so the Gates program. Who else has seen the videos that are going viral about the Gates programs? Maybe it's my algorithm just showing me what I'm talking about. But then I had like 3 very close friends say, yeah, when I was younger, I was in one of those programs. I was like, you were too? So much trauma. So this is testimony that I heard that you know, pushes this into very, very dark territory. You know, like this crosses the threshold of what's going on with the Epstein trafficking, and how some of these kids are groomed for that. And many of these kids are being groomed for psionic abilities. And Jake Barber talks extensively about that. Jake Barber is a whistleblower who worked on a crash retrieval program. Now, in a sane world, his testimony, when he came out finally and talked about the programs he worked on, it would have been on every major news outlet. The interview would have been front page, because that is the first time that a person who has literally worked hands-on, not only just in the psionics programs, but on the crash retrieval programs, and on many facets of these underground variety of programs. Ross Coulthart said, Jake Barber is the closest thing to James Bond he ever met. And Ross Coulthart has been an investigative reporter his entire life, and he's not a young guy. He's got to be 65, I think, you know? And for him to say that, that tells you a lot about Jake Barber. And the truth is, I heard of Jake Barber because this gets really telenova now. Ready? This is crazy. So Jake Barber was sent in to Dr. Stephen Greer's community to infiltrate. So he was sent in as to be a. This is how counterintelligence works. You know, they send you in, and they do this, guys. They do this like. This was January 6th. They plant a plant, you know, to set up what will be a false flag or to gather information. He was initially sent in to gather information about Dr. Greer and what he was doing and the people who were operating with him, because Dr. Greer has a lot of intelligence assets on his team personally. And when he got there, it had been right after Michael Herrera. Hi, Malcolm. When he got there, right after Michael Herrera gave his testimony about the ship in Indonesia and about those crates, those big giant metal crates being loaded onto the UFO. And he couldn't go through with his assignment. And he told Dr. Greer, he told him the truth. He said, I was sent here to infiltrate and spy on you. He said, but I can't do this anymore. He couldn't do it anymore. So he came clean. And he started to tell the truth about what he had been experiencing. He's the one that told both Dr. Greer and Danny Sheehan that what was in those crates, they were metal. They were more like cages, was children that they were taking from that area of Indonesia, and they were going to bring into these programs. And he said he knows because he was one of the children that was a part of these programs. And understand that each and every one of us has consciousness at hand, and we can do so many things we're never taught with that consciousness, including make contact and communicate with our family from the stars. And people do it all the time. And I've done it. I mean, I know I may sound crazy, but I'm not. I'm gonna be crazy in a good way, but you can initiate contact with life from other planets. You can have a whole dialogue. Sometimes they'll even land when it's safe. We have made it so that it's not often safe, but sometimes they're already on the ground and you don't realize it. So, I've gone out and done this. You can use consciousness and use a meditative state with a coherent heart and mind. With a coherent heart and mind, you can do just about anything. If you don't know, there's so much. There's a whole world to understand how powerful it is when you can sync your mind and your heart together. The kind of energy you can move and create, and what you can do with that energy is virtually limitless. And that's what these programs are about. They're taking advantage of our innate ability to use our consciousness across space and time. Consciousness is non-local. This kind of energy is non-local. And these young kids are being used to connect, bring ships down, all kinds of things. And my point in sharing that with you is understand that you can be a cynic all day. I understand cynicism, and Ross Coulthart is as big a cynic as anyone. Ross Coulthart was an atheist, sworn atheist, and he talked to us for an hour about this experience he had with Jake Barber and a bunch of actually Silicon Valley billionaires who had taken him out to this ranch in San Francisco because they wanted a demonstration of how this CE5 protocol, this meditation protocol, works to call in the UFOs. And Ross was like, "Yeah, I went for the ride because they were my whistleblowers, right?" Let's see, Malcolm. They're getting drugged to make these psionics work at times. That's right, Malcolm. Widespread. That's absolutely right. Widespread reports of uppers, downers, this pink liquid. So they're inducing through these substances the altered state that they need these children to be in. That is, and they're experimenting with it. They're doing it in the darker territories of the Gates programs with these kids. And that is very, very widespread and very reported. Ross mentioned that several times. So he told me this awesome story that he hadn't told anyone yet about this experience he had. So Ross was forced to go to Catholic school when he was young, swore off all religion, and was a very outspoken atheist. He said that he's sitting there, right? And so he's with Jake Barber and one other guy, I forgot his name, and these guys are really good. They're trained in psionics, so they know how to initiate contact. They know how to put themselves into the right state and reach out. And they've been doing it since they were kids. So one of them, Ross said they were sitting there, and they're all sitting in a chair under the stars, and he heard one of the guy whose name I can't remember say, "I'm engaged. That's what he said. And Ross was like, "I don't know what that means." He was like, "I don't know." Okay. And the guy said that. He said, "They're coming," and he said, "And we're going to see a blue hexagonal shape around 10:30." And Ross was like, "Right." Ross said, "I didn't believe him." He was like, I'm with like two of these whistleblowers who are ex-military psionics guys. They're talking mumbo jumbo. He's like, "I didn't believe him for a second." And I'm with four Playboy billionaires from Silicon Valley, one of whom he couldn't name. He said is an older Chinese dude who survived Tiananmen Square. Maybe you guys know who he was referring to. I didn't know who he was referring to. But he said that as soon as he said that, all these ships showed up on the horizon, and everyone was like, and the Chinese billionaire who he said he wouldn't name his name, I don't know who he might be talking about. he said that he stood up. He was like, he was with his, 20-year-old girlfriend, of course. And he stood up and he's like, come over here, we love you, we love you. And he said, in that second, all the lights came forward, all of them. And he said everyone started to pick up the same sentiment. And everyone was like, come closer, we love you. All these billionaires, they were probably fucked up, but the more love they put out, the closer these craft got. And Ross's jaw was on the ground. Ross was like, holy shit, he couldn't believe what he was watching and witnessing, but he said I could feel it. He said I could feel the connection between us and them. And he said, and since then he's been struggling with this notion that there's not a higher power, that we could possibly live in a place where there was no divine intelligence which runs this. He said, because, not to sound woo, these were his exact words, not to sound woo-woo, he said, but these beings responded to love more than anything. And I thought, wow, imagine that. Imagine that. And then what happened was the guy who was in the meditation came out of the meditation and everyone was like, just in shock and on cloud nine. And he turned to Ross and he said, I can't believe the blue hexagon didn't show up. And he said, as soon as he said that, on the other side of the bay where they were, of this place in San Francisco, this beautiful blue hexagon came up over the horizon. And Ross looked at his watch and it was 10:30 on the dot. And he said he almost fell over. He said he dropped to a knee. He couldn't believe it. He was floored. He was like, no fucking way. He said, I was not a believer in any of this, what I considered woo-woo shit, until that moment. He said, and that has rocked my worldview. I've been struggling with this for 2 years, he talked about it. I mean, and that is just a crazy, phenomenal story. But when I tell you guys that each and every one of you has the ability, absolutely, unequivocally, to connect with, and that there's nothing to be scared of, you're not going to connect with anything but the benevolent beings who you are searching for, who care enough about this human race to make contact with you, to assure you that there is wonder left to be discovered, that we have not been told the whole truth about our past, about what we're doing here, about our origin stories. We're always up looking up at the sky saying, oh, where do they come from? We don't even know where we come from. All we know is we showed up on the planet with this DNA about between 200 and 300,000 years ago tops. That's what we know. And no one's asking these questions. And so I just thought this was, an incredible, and guys, if you've heard of the Monroe Institute, all of these abilities can be honed. You can be a cynic all day, but you can be a cynic while you also learn to be a great psychic, okay? Believe it or not, it's innate. It's in your DNA. It comes with your soul. It comes with your consciousness. So I wanted to share all that. Do I have any other nuggets that I have stashed for you guys? Let's see here. So let me see. Mike was a Green Beret. He calls himself Sonic Mike. Oh, no kidding, Malcolm. I didn't know that. Probably. Oh, yeah. Oh, you're thinking of the dude. The guy. Not the Chinese guy. I'm not sure who you're thinking of, but I don't know. But the other thing that Danny said, and if you haven't checked out the New Paradigm Institute, I encourage you guys to check it out. I'm not an affiliate. The guy with Jake, that's right, Malcolm. I think his name was Mike. He's Psionic Mike. I think that is what they call him. He's a powerhouse. The New Paradigm Institute, where Danny Sheehan runs his operations, they're trying like hell to use the law the same way they did in the Iran-Contra affair, the same way they did with, you can name one national, or what do you call it, like Watergate, you name it. These are the guys who have been holding the government to the flame for 35 years. They're the only ones really who have ever had success using the law to force the truth out into the public's eye, into the public's ears. And Danny Sheehan is getting up in years, but he's trying right now to file a RICO case. And he has the information. He has to collect the information because you have to have the information to file a RICO case. Now, his right-hand woman, I forgot her name, she'd been with him forever. She stood up and she told us, she said, listen, you don't just go home and mull this over. You know, look at the New Paradigm Institute. You know, he had a barcode, QR code, and you know, it was scan it to tell your representatives that if they don't support the disclosure movement, if they don't support the revealing the truth about what's been kept from us, then we're not going to vote for them. Because if we're stuck in this system, then we have to try to use the system. And I know how crazy that sounds, but people are using it when it comes to AIPAC. The public has learned, and you're going to see in the next 2 years, the people who get elected are going to be the ones who swear off AIPAC money. And the truth is, we should make them swear off all lobbying money. We have to get rid of that. It is one of the most corrupting factors in our government. But I hear people already talking to candidates saying, I won't vote for anyone who takes AIPAC money. Well, we shouldn't vote for anyone at any level who will not pledge to support the disclosure movement, because this issue is the most important in our day. You got ships outside of Iran. You have a government that has a clandestine ability to put a nuke anywhere in the world in seconds, minutes tops. That is a problem, because China and Russia have the same capacity, and these programs are absolutely illegal and unconstitutional. It's all quite exciting, differently intense, just feeling amazing. Awesome, man, awesome. So check out the New Paradigm Institute, you guys, you know, because this world doesn't have to look like this. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. You know, in the 50s, when they would paint the futurescapes, you would always see the flying cars and the railways, and everything was hovering, and you have this beautiful architecture, and we lost that. There's another documentary that you guys have to see, shot by the same filmmaker I'm working with, incredible documentarian. His name is Michael Mazzola. He directed Unacknowledged, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and The Lost Century. The Lost Century will tell you one patent after the next how much of this technology has been hidden so that they can keep the control system in place. But I wanted to tell you guys about everything I've been learning, and you know, the cover-ups and where it all came from. I hope that I kept you guys in a state of at least entertainment and maybe learning a little bit about some of these programs. What's the latest, where you can go if you care like I do. I support the New Paradigm Institute. I support Danny Sheehan, even though I'm not a fan of Lou Elizondo. I know the story about how those two ended up together, and it didn't work out very well for Danny, but Danny was trying to do what he thought was right, and turns out Lou wasn't very honest about a lot of things, and he's still not being honest. You know, when you hear them say, and they're going to be saying it, now listen, if there is any release of any files, you can rest assured they're going to be procured to scare you. They're going to be designed to make you think that there's something big coming. There's a threat. And that's all they know how to do. That's how they know how to keep control, is to scare you. Don't buy their bullshit. It's all propaganda to scare you and make you think that there's some outer space threat when there's not, and there never has been. We have incredible beings watching over us, or we wouldn't have made it this far, quite frankly. You know how many times human beings have tried to nuke themselves? Like 5 or 6. And somehow that switch never works. Oftentimes it's accompanied by a ship. And the reason why it doesn't work can be directly correlated with our brothers and sisters who are trying to keep us from self-annihilating. But I appreciate you guys so much. Been studying his ship for 20 years. If they wanted us gone, that's right, Malcolm, that's right. Thank you so much, Davey. Listen, thank you guys so much for joining me. My dad's turning 80. It's his birthday today, and appreciate you, Secret Society. Thank you so much, you guys. Thanks for bearing with me. I know I was talking a mile a minute. There's a party going on downstairs. My dad's turning 80. Today's his birthday, so I'm excited to go downstairs, and all my family's here, and I appreciate you guys taking some time out on a Friday during happy hour and spending it with me. Much love to all you guys, and I hope you have a great weekend with your family and your loved ones, whatever you do. Check out the new Paradigm Institute. Share this podcast once the link is up. I appreciate that, and much love to you guys. Thank you so much, Marina. I appreciate you guys. God bless you all. Thanks, Walter. Thanks, brother. Appreciate you guys.